and this session today is in celebration of Dyslexia Awareness Month. And just to point out that this session is being recorded, and this session will be recorded and it'll be available for approximately 4 weeks. So if you would like to maybe watch it after today, or individuals who might not be able to join today, they will have the recording for the next 4 weeks. And because of that, we would ask that in respect of the group that we don't have anybody using AI transcription, summarizing or recording tools during this live session. But by all means, you are free to use any assistive technology alongside the recording once you have that. So that's just a quick kind of housekeeping thing. And then another housekeeping thing is that we have a Q&A box, and we also have a chat box. So today we are going to be using the chat box for any questions that I openly ask during this session. So for example, when I ask, what dyslexia is, if you can type your answers into the chat box. And also I'll be asking for your opinions and your engagement on a particular video that I'm going to show you. So you can you can input your thoughts in the chat box. So the Q&A box is for very specific questions that you might have about dyslexia. So you can pop those questions in there. So hopefully that's okay, and everybody understands that. But don't worry if you get it wrong or whatever, it's totally fine. Okay, so we'll move through. And so just to present myself, my name is Nicola Began, and I'm one of the adult dyslexia coordinators here at Dyslexia Ireland. So my contact details are up there on the screen. So if anything comes up for you, it could be after today, could be weeks or months down the road, please by all means reach out to me there on nicolabegan@dyslexia.ie. So I'm also joined by my colleague Caoimhe O'Malley, who is our senior adult dyslexia coordinator. And Caoimhe's contact details are also up there. And if you do have any questions for Caoimhe, you can pop them into the Q&A box. But just to say that we will have approximately about 10 minutes towards the end of the session for any kind of live questions, anything that you would like to verbalize, or again, you can pop it into the Q&A box. Okay, so we'll get straight into it. So the learning outcomes for today, it's my hope that by the end of the session today, that you're going to come away with a much deeper, a much richer understanding of what dyslexia is and, what dyslexia isn't. And, it would be my hope that you'll be able to separate the facts from the myths, and that you'll come away with a better understanding of the challenges associated with dyslexia, particularly within the workplace, but also at the same time that you're going to be aware of the strengths that dyslexic individuals can have, because it's really these strengths that we need to be harnessing and that we need to be really showcasing and giving employees the opportunity to showcase those strengths within the workplace. So that's really, really important. And throughout the challenges that we'll speak about, I will give some kind of general tips on how we maybe manage some of those challenges within a workplace context. Okay, so to open up this part of the session, I want you to open up the chat box. And my question to you is, what does dyslexia look like in the workplace? And I want you just to write in, the first thing that comes to your mind, and you don't have to overthink it. It's just literally the first thing. And I'd be interested to see, what comes up for people, and then we can have a quick discussion on that. Okay, yeah, so lots of things coming up here, which is great. So creativity, yeah, absolutely. And all too often with dyslexia, there does tend to be a tendency to focus maybe on the challenges more so than on the strengths that dyslexic individuals can have. So I'm delighted that you brought that up. And yes, it's true, dyslexic individuals can be very, very creative. So a lot of the time, this creativity comes from having to have put in place lots of different strategies over, a continuous period, and having to maybe adapt those strategies time and time again. Um, you know, Coming up with new ways to cope with challenges. And if you're doing that on a regular basis, you are very likely to become quite adaptable, quite creative. You're going to be able to find, creative solutions to very complex problems because you've had really good practice at it. So creativity is one, absolutely. Then stress. Yeah, stress is very much associated with dyslexia. And we would see this all the time in the workplace. Individuals who maybe have had, bad experiences in education, excuse me, and then they're coming into the workplace and they're bringing a lot of those feelings, a lot of those emotions with them. And, if you were to maybe ask that individual to read something aloud, if you were asked them to maybe to get up and to write on the whiteboard in a meeting setting, that would cause that individual a lot of stress and anxiety, because there's that fear that they're going to make a mistake. There's a fear that maybe their colleagues might laugh or ridicule them. And a lot of the time it's coming from negative past experiences. So where possible, we can ease that stress by, letting individuals know in advance if we're going to be expecting, a discussion on a topic. We should never, cold call people and ask people questions on the spot. We should always ask for a volunteer. So that's important to keep in mind. Yes, it does very much so bring up stress for individuals. Yeah, swimming upstream. Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely that's definitely one. Yeah. Organization challenges. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because sometimes that's not often associated with dyslexia. We tend to focus maybe on the reading, writing, and spelling challenges that dyslexic individuals have. But there can be challenges with organization in terms of, it could be organizing their work day, planning ahead, you know, estimating how long it takes to do something versus, you know, um, they might overestimate or underestimate the amount of time it takes to do something. So that affects their organization, it affects their planning. So that's why maybe individuals might maybe turn up late to meetings, or they might forget about meetings completely. And it's not because they weren't bothered or that they were, they're being, you know, disobedient or whatever. It's just that it's kind of like time just runs away from them. And that's that kind of idea of time blindness, where you know where you have to be, but there's just something that the time just kind of runs away from you. And before you know it, you're late for a meeting. So that's important to note as well. Double checking and doubting. Absolutely. This is a really, really good one here, because I've seen this come up time and time again, where there's kind of that imposter syndrome with dyslexic individuals within the workplace. And they, because they're so afraid of making a mistake, they will sometimes, go out of their way to double check, to triple check, to quadruple check. And it's because they're just so afraid of making a mistake. And they will date themselves and they will think, everybody else is better than I am. And, they're the kind of individual that sometimes they won't go for those promotions in work. And it's because they feel that they are less than, that if they do go for that promotion, that everybody's going to find out that they're dyslexic or that they're not able to do their job, when that just isn't the case. But that fear is real, and it follows people around for a very, very long time. So it's important that we create that safe environment where individuals feel that they can disclose, where they feel that they can be themselves. And we will kind of take a look at that as we move through. So for long hours, yeah. So some people, because things are taking them maybe a little bit longer to process, they might have to spend more time on certain tasks. They might maybe have to come into work earlier. They might have to stay and work late in order to get work done. I've heard of some individuals having to maybe take work home at the weekend, for example, and that can have a really negative impact on work life, home life. So it's really, really important that we don't have our dyslexic individuals burning out, because that can often be a real challenge. So problem solvers, absolutely, they are again that kind of that creativity, that analytical problem thinking. Yeah, and somebody has here, they work in different ways. So we would say at Dyslexia Ireland that dyslexia is a learning difference. So it is that different way of thinking, that different way of processing information. And just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong or that it's a deficit. It's just that it's different. So that's really, really important to keep in mind, because we need all of these differences in thought, in opinion. It makes the learning experience, it makes the workplace a richer environment because of those different ways of looking at things. So yeah, somebody has here thinking outside of the box. Yeah, absolutely. Um, Anxiety writing emails and reading instructions correctly. Yeah. So writing emails often comes up, and sometimes this comes from maybe they've worked with somebody in the past that has maybe pointed out particular spelling errors that they've made. And because of that, there's that fear, oh, if I make these spelling errors again, I'm going to be ridiculed. And so it's just really, really important that if we, as colleagues, if we can understand the meaning of an email, does it really matter if there's a few spelling mistakes? If it's not taking away from the meaning of the email, then it shouldn't be, you don't need to highlight that, and especially not to everybody. We don't need to CC everybody on that email. So that is something that comes up. And reading instructions. And that's oftentimes because we might have to maybe read through instructions several times in order to fully process what we're being asked to do. So sometimes there's a fear that we might maybe miss a certain point within those instructions. Yeah, working memory. That's a huge one. So, your working memory is, holding and manipulating information over short periods of time. So it could be when you're speaking on the phone to somebody, and maybe you're giving them a long list of instructions. So that person has to hold in their head what you are saying to them. They're having to decipher whether that information is relevant or irrelevant. And then they're having to write down coherent notes. So there's a lot going on in that process. So for the individual, that can be quite difficult. So what we would say is that perhaps maybe you could record conversations, or you could follow up that verbal conversation with an email, for example. That would also be good, so that the individual could use their read aloud function on their email and have that information read back aloud to them. So let me see. So is everybody able to hear me okay? Hopefully, hopefully you can now. So yeah, there can be short-term memory difficulties, and that can hinder conversations and basic recall of facts. So I've spoken about that already. People can be overwhelmed, absolutely. They can get tired as well. They can get tired, and this is a really, really big one, because sometimes, especially when you're reading, you're spending maybe so much time on trying to read accurately and quickly that sometimes something's got to give. And, it just takes so much mental energy and cognitive energy that you've very little left to give on some days. So some individuals would come back from work in the evening time and they'd just be absolutely exhausted. So that's really, really important to keep in mind. Okay, perfect. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play a video, and this is from our Voices of Dyslexia. And this video, this is on our adult dyslexia hub. So it's a video that shares the experiences of lots of dyslexic individuals. And one of the common themes in this video is that, dyslexia, it can be different for everybody, and how it appears and how it presents itself can be different. And, dyslexia occurs on a spectrum ranging from mild, moderate to severe. So really, really important that we keep that in mind, and that if we are working with dyslexic individuals, that we very much take a very individualized, person-centered approach when we're figuring out, what supports can help them, because each individual is going to have different challenges. Okay, so I'm going to press play now.
Think outside the box. And that's a classic one. Like, my world is, where did that box come from? Like, who invented the box? So what we're doing is shoving people into a box. Dyslexics, the box doesn't exist.
I would explain to them that it's a way of how my brain processes information. For me, it feels like that, at many different levels.
We read differently, we write differently. I struggle with how to structure stuff differently, and I need a little bit of extra support from time to time.
It's a learning difficulty, and I learn and absorb information differently to others.
And at times it can be problematic, and it can embarrass you for sure, and other times then it can be great. I love writing, and yet spelling has been a problem my whole life.
I've had friends who are brilliant at English, but then not good at maths, but are also still dyslexic.
I was awarded a full ride scholarship there a couple of years ago to go to America in the leading university to study, psychology. I have a learning difficulty, or I have a learning disability. Going, what the hell are you talking about?
The word that I love, which is used by the Dyslexia Association, is you learn different.
I think when you have that attitude when you go into an interview or an audition, you do have that confidence to disclose it in a positive way.
Something that should be embraced, and something that has made me what I am.
All the things that makes up my personality. Dyslexia is one thing that makes up my personality. Not the only thing, but it's one thing that makes up my personality.
I always knew I had something that others didn't have, but we do have different senses.
I think it gives me a different, more mindset, especially being an entrepreneur and owning my own business, that I can just see things in a different light and see things having an opportunity. So that's why I see it as a benefit now.
Thinking outside of the box is a huge part of being dyslexic, but also the confidence of being able to open that box and just let everything out. And it's literally like throwing stuff against the wall and just seeing what sticks. And at the end of the day, dyslexic people have so many skills that other people mightn't have, and they can bring their own spin to the project or the job.
I'm not afraid to ask for help now. I think that's the difference, and it's not a secret anymore. I'm not embarrassed or ashamed by it.
Like I said earlier, there's nothing wrong with being different. Got me having my dyslexia, having that diagnosis got me my first choice in college. It gave me a strong work ethic. Nothing wrong with either of those things. I'll take it. If that means I have to say I'm dyslexic, no better.
It's nothing got to do with being intelligent or being stupid and all that. It's nothing to do with IQ.
Knowing that I'm not stupid, I was able to create that as a fact, rather than creating it as a fact that I am stupid.
I am what I am, not in spite of the dyslexia, but because of it. I am what I am, not because of the education system in Ireland, but in spite of it.
When it's over, you might have made mistakes, but we all do, because we're human at the end of the day. And I think it's so important to be very proud of your dyslexia, and I'm learning more and more to be more proud of it and see it as a gift.
But we do know that really gifted and really highly intelligent and highly ambitious and great people, are dyslexic, and so it's not something that should come to define you. And you should move beyond those linear, myopic ideas about, spelling and all that. What the hell is that anyway?
While I was confident being dyslexic, I didn't put myself out there in sports or music or dance because I had such a lack of coordination and lack of rhythm. Whereas now I'm looking at it going, nobody cares. Nobody is actually watching you. They're all so fixated on themselves.
Concentrate on what you enjoy. Because I think what defines you, you've got to be careful about what defines. So what defines you has to be who you are, because you're dyslexic, and what you love and what you enjoy. Because those two things balance nicely.
Try to open up a little bit more about it. Don't be so guarded about it. It's nothing to be fearful of.
So rather than getting defined by the limits of your dyslexia, you should try and be defined by what spurs you on.
So just go out there and have fun. And play soccer like you have two left feet and clap out of time to the rhythm. Just enjoy the music.
I don't think we know what it is, and that has yet to be revealed. The most fascinating thing is the brain, and we don't know really how it works. We know all the different parts of it, but what is the mind and how does that work? We don't know.
Think outside.
Okay, so into the chat box. Is there anything there that came up for anybody during that? Like any kind of thoughts or any ideas that really stood out? Yeah, somebody says here that we don't know enough about the brain yet. Yeah, and we're learning things about the brain all of the time, and that's the thing. You know, research, you know, is always, you know, becoming more and more. There's more research being added all the time, so I think we still have a lot more to learn about how the actual brain works. Um, yeah, that feeling of being less than, that's a huge one, and it's a feeling that, you know, is carried around for a very, very long time, and it's terrible because some individuals will feel that they can't go for promotions, that they're um that they just, you know, they're better off kind of coasting along in the background, because that's where they feel more safe. There's that kind of fear of taking a risk and then making a mistake. So it absolutely does affect that. Yeah, somebody has here to embrace our different needs. Absolutely. And that's why it's so important within the workplace to incorporate that universal design for learning kind of aspect in everything that we do. So providing information in a variety of different formats. So rather than always focusing on text, that we can also focus on, say, on, you know, videos, on audio. If we can even incorporate videos, audio, and visuals, then we can then we're kind of catering to everybody that way. I really like this one here. There is no box. Absolutely, nobody fits into a box, and that's why it's important that if we are working with individuals with dyslexia, and we're thinking about different supports that we can give them, we can't just assume that what has worked for one individual in the past is also going to work for this particular individual, because each individual is unique. And we could say that dyslexia is as individual as a fingerprint. So really important to keep that in mind. So somebody has here the importance of owning it. It is great that we can be open now and not hide it for 15 years in my workplace due to fear. Absolutely, yes. I would like to hope that the workplace and in education as well is a lot more open about these things. You know, but it's something that is very much a work in progress. But we do see a lot of organizations putting together, you know, neurodiversity policies. You know, there's a lot of organizations that will partner with maybe other organizations, you know, like ourselves in Dyslexia Ireland or other neurodiverse profiles. So there is a lot of work going on in that space, a lot of good work. And somebody says here, it resonated with me when the teacher is saying he is no longer ashamed, and now I have confirmation that I am dyslexic, I am able to own it. That's a really, really important one, because when you have a word, or when you have words to describe what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, you no longer just think, oh, it must be because I'm stupid. You have a name for your difficulties, and that can be extremely empowering for individuals to know that they are not stupid. They just have maybe a different they just have to maybe process things in a different way. It's just a difference. You know, they have their strengths in other areas, because we know that individuals with dyslexia have average to above average levels of IQ. And we know that IQ has got nothing to do with dyslexia. We know lots of highly intelligent dyslexic individuals. So it's got nothing to do with intelligence. So just to kind of point that out as it's come up. Yeah, and it's good to no longer be ashamed of not being maybe be able to spell correctly all the time. That's a really, really important point. So thank you. Okay, so there's a question there just on assessment, but I will come back to that. I just kind of want to move on because I'm conscious of time, but we'll get to that afterwards. Okay, so dyslexia, it is a learning difference, as I mentioned, and it's a difficulty that can cause difficulties with learning and work, and it affects approximately 1 in 10. Now that 1 in 10, that could be higher. That's just based on the research that we currently have. But there's research going on all of the time. So that figure may well indeed be higher than that. So that's really important. So that's 10% of the workplace population. So that's a high percentage of people that you work with that could be dyslexic. So dyslexia, as I said, it occurs in a spectrum. And that spectrum can range from mild to moderate and then to severe. And it's important to note that that spectrum isn't fixed. So sometimes depending on what we are asking an individual to do and under what circumstances we are asking them to do it, that's when we can see that spectrum changing. So one individual who might maybe under normal circumstances might have maybe mild dyslexia. And that's a lot of the time because they have really good coping strategies to manage their dyslexia. But then if that person moves on to maybe a new job role, or they have a new manager that has a completely different style of working, that's when you might maybe see somebody's dyslexia becoming a bit more moderate than it had been previously. And a lot of the time that's because maybe the right supports aren't in place yet. So it's just to point out that spectrum can change, but with the right supports and accommodations, dyslexic individuals can thrive and they can be successful in all aspects of life, whether that's in education, the workplace, and in wider society. So everybody with dyslexia is different, but there is that commonality of difficulties. So here we're talking about reading, spelling, writing, and also related cognitive processing difficulties, like what some of you had mentioned earlier, like organization, time management, and challenges with working memory and things like that. So dyslexia, it's not a general difficulty with learning. And so it impacts those specific skill areas that I mentioned above. And that's, again, important to note because we sometimes hear from individuals that there's that idea that dyslexia is associated with intelligence. So at Dyslexia Ireland, we no longer carry out the IQ component of a dyslexia assessment. And that's because we know that there is no link between dyslexia and IQ. So again, just want to highlight that important message. Again, and we've already really spoken about this, the impact of dyslexia can change according to the environment. So as, say, a manager, it's really important, you know, and even as colleagues, that we, you know, provide information in advance, that we don't cold call people, that we don't put them on the spot, because sometimes it's under those circumstances where somebody's dyslexia can come to the fore and can bring through a lot of that stress and a lot of that anxiety that some of you spoke about in the chat box. So while people with dyslexia have or can, you know, develop strengths due to their dyslexia, and oftentimes these are strengths like resilience, determination, and also sometimes, you know, motivation and resilience. And this is oftentimes because they've had to be resilient, they've had to be motivated and determined because they've been knocked back time and time again. So because of that, you can develop, strengths as a result of that. So that's important to note. But at the same time, we can't just assume that somebody who is dyslexic is automatically going to be a fantastic problem solver, that they're automatically going to be creative, they're going to be, an entrepreneur, an inventor, things like that. And that's because if we have those high expectations of dyslexic individuals, and if they don't meet those high expectations, then they are going to internalize that as failure. And as a result of that, not only are they going to feel that they are failing in the traditional sense of learning and working, they also now feel that they are failing at being, that poster child for dyslexia. So that's really, really important to note. It's just highlighting that idea again that dyslexic individuals are individuals. And it's up to us as managers, as colleagues, to find out what individuals' strengths are, and that we can hone in on those strengths and give individuals the opportunity to showcase those strengths so that they, like their non-dyslexic peers and colleagues, can reach their full potential. So when it comes to terminology, we often get asked, should I say a dyslexic person or should I say a person with dyslexia? So oftentimes here, it's really down to the individual preference of the individual. So some people will prefer a dyslexic person, and that's because they feel that their dyslexia is part of who they are. So they don't want to separate themselves from their dyslexia. Because if they were to do that, there would be that kind of undertone of dyslexia being a bad thing. And for those individuals who would say a dyslexic person, that's not how they see their dyslexia. It's part of who they are. Whereas individuals that would say a person with dyslexia, they would see their dyslexia as being secondary to them. So they are essentially more important than their dyslexia. So that's kind of just the differences in opinion there. So if you're speaking to an individual one-on-one, why not ask the individual exactly what they would like, what terminology they would like you to use. And then if you're speaking with a wider audience, then you can use those those different terms interchangeably. And then that way you are catering to everybody's preference. Okay. So dyslexia is a recognised disability under Irish and EU law. And this is particularly important for the workplace because it means that there is an onus on employers and organisations to put in place reasonable accommodations for employees if they disclose their dyslexia. And that's really, really important to hone in on. It's important from, an employee who is dyslexic perspective, but also if you are a manager or the owner of a business, it's important that you know that there is, you have like a legal obligation to put in place support and to do so in a timely manner. And also kind of on that point, sometimes when individuals, when they're getting, onboarding for a new job, they might maybe be asked about if they have a disability. And for some individuals with dyslexia, they don't consider their dyslexia to be a disability. So we have to respect and acknowledge that viewpoint. And we have to make sure that if we are, asking employees about disability, that we also have maybe another phrase in there that is more general, that gives the individual the opportunity to share their challenges, just in case they don't see their dyslexia as being a disability. So it could be something like, we are committed to an inclusive work environment. Please let us know if you've got any access requirements or require any, additional supports, during your time with us. Something kind of more general that gives the individual the opportunity to share their challenges. So that can be a good idea. And as I mentioned there, some individuals don't consider themselves to be disabled. So we do respect that viewpoint, but at the same time, it's so important that that is in legislation as being a disability, because it means that employers have to put in place reasonable accommodations. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to move on to the impact of dyslexia, the challenges that can be associated with dyslexia. So the core root of dyslexia is a phonological processing difficulty. So there's a difficulty there with blending and manipulating the sounds of language. So if there's a difficulty in this area, it's going to impact an individual's reading, it's going to impact their spelling and their writing. So when somebody is reading, they are breaking down, they are decoding the letters and the combinations of letters, and they are matching those letters to sounds. So this is a process that can take a considerable amount of time when you're dyslexic. So sometimes dyslexic individuals will read at a slower pace. They might maybe read less fluently because there's difficulty maybe with decoding, and they're having to maybe stop and start, and the pace can be impacted. And also with reading, sometimes comprehension isn't always gained from reading a text first time round. So some individuals might have to read something maybe 2 or 3 times, and that's because they have to focus so much of their attention on reading and reading accurately that something has got to give. And oftentimes it's the comprehension side of things. There just isn't enough cognitive energy left to comprehend what they are reading. So that's important to note, that if you're asking somebody, if you're having a discussion on a topic in work and, it needs maybe people to read a document, you might maybe need to give extra time for that person with dyslexia to read. The best thing to do here would be that you would give that document maybe a week in advance or a few days in advance, so that everybody can actually read it in their own time and at their own pace, because that's going to be a lot quicker, a lot more productive, not just for the dyslexic individual, but also for everybody. So spelling and writing is another challenge. So here, dyslexia is impacting those sound letter associations. So what happens is that some individuals might maybe spell words incorrectly, and because maybe they can't spell a particular word, they have to choose a more simple or more basic word. And now the rest of the sentence doesn't fit with that word. So now they have to maybe simplify the written expression. So sometimes it can look like you're looking at 2 different people. So the dyslexic individual who is a really strong verbal communicator, who's able to get across their really, really strong, rich ideas when they speak, but then when they try and put pen to paper, it's just not coming out for them. So that's why it's important to let individuals maybe use features like dictate, where they can speak what they want to say, and they can use, spelling and grammar tools to fix maybe the grammar. Letting individuals maybe, just not always having the focus just on writing and spelling. Maybe they can do a presentation rather than doing up, a 5-page report. Having that flexibility is going to be really, really important. So memory challenges can also be impacted. So here we're talking about, working memory, short-term memory, and also long-term memory. So with the working memory, where this can impact somebody is maybe when they are taking notes or minutes at a meeting. So that individual has to listen to what's being said. They have to determine if the information is relevant, then they're having to write down the notes for that. And oftentimes the individual can come away with their notes and not be able to make really head or tail of them because there's chunks of information missing. And it's because they were having difficulty keeping up when all of that information was being spoken. So what can be a really good solution to this issue is if we allow individuals to record meetings, to record conversations, so that the individual can then listen back to that and they can reabsorb, retain the information that way. And it also reduces a lot of anxiety for the individual. And, I'm sure it will help all individuals in an organization, not just the dyslexic individual. So that's worth keeping in mind. And then other things like planning, organization, and time management. And it was great to see one of you had mentioned that organization could be a challenge with dyslexia in the chat box earlier. And that oftentimes isn't something that people would associate with dyslexia. They think it's just reading, writing, and spelling challenges. But the truth of the matter is that organization can be very much impacted. So a dyslexic individual might have difficulty with planning, organizing, and managing their time. So they might maybe overestimate how long it takes to do a particular task. They might maybe underestimate it. And as a result, they're spending too long on something or not spending enough time on something. And then when it comes to forward planning, there's a difficulty sometimes in, breaking tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks and to kind of structure out and sequence what has to be done. And all of that can lead to problems with, procrastination as well, kind of putting things off because there's that fear that you're not going to succeed in it. So these are all very, very real challenges for the dyslexic individual. Then finally, I have here confidence and self-esteem. And this is a really, really huge one. As I mentioned, a lot of dyslexic individuals who are highly competent, highly intelligent individuals, when they go into a workplace scenario, they can sometimes just prefer to coast along because it's a safer option, because they don't want to put themselves out there. They don't want to risk, feeling insecure. It's kind of a form of self-preservation. And what a shame that is, because a lot of skills, a lot of talent can really go to waste. So it's really important that if we do see anybody that maybe is struggling in that kind of with their confidence and self-esteem, that we try and help them find ways to kind of boost their confidence and self-esteem. And we can do that by having that strengths-based approach to tasks and to training. So despite those challenges with dyslexia, there's also a huge amount of strengths that can come from being dyslexic, or that people would associate with their dyslexia. And now some of these strengths, not every single dyslexic individual is going to have each of these strengths. So that's important to note as well. But the first one here, creative thinking. So it's that idea that some of you mentioned, that ability to think outside of the box, to come up with those new creative solutions to complex problems. So they're individuals that you want and that you need to have on your team, because they're going to be that individual that's just going to see things maybe a little bit differently, that's going to be able to have kind of a fresh perspective on something. And oftentimes, if we all think in the same way, we're not going to be able to come up with new ideas and new ways of thinking. So we need to really value this creative thinking that a lot of dyslexic individuals have. And alongside that, from creative thinking, that's going to build skills with, being adaptable, being flexible. Individuals can become, very, they want to persevere, being adaptable and being flexible. And those are going to be great skills when you're trying to persevere under challenging circumstances. So visual and spatial ability. So here we're talking about that ability to understand and manipulate 3D objects. to see the interconnected nature between different parts of an object, to understand how different parts of objects work with one another. So oftentimes this is kind of like, your ability to maybe set up IKEA furniture and things like that. That's where you would use your spatial awareness and spatial kind of visual abilities. So we do see a lot of individuals going into things like engineering, design, art. Those are industries where those skills really, really are a strong benefit. So individuals with dyslexia, they often can be very strong verbal communicators. So where maybe they have challenges with written expression, they can more than well, make up for that with their verbal skills. So they're the kind of person that, if you work in client management, if you work in marketing, if you're pitching products, if you're negotiating, trying to get your point across, they're the kind of individuals that you need to have on your team. Individuals that are going to be able to present a product and to really big it up. And, oftentimes they do have that kind of gift of the gab. They're able to form those really strong, powerful connections with individual, those really strong interpersonal skills. So they can be very, very persuasive, and they can be excellent storytellers. Again, they can be very resilient and determined. And that again has come oftentimes from being knocked down and having to brush themselves off and get back up again. And if you're doing that time and time again, you will become resilient. And most of the time, now not all of the time, you will become determined and motivated, because there's that idea that you want to prove people wrong. But at the same time, we can't forget that it can go the other way, and it can actually, that having to constantly pick yourself up time and time again, that can lead to low levels of self-esteem, and can mean that maybe some individuals, they just want to coast along in the workplace. They don't want to go for job promotions. So it's important to keep in mind both of those perspectives. Then finally, empathy and understanding is a huge one. And if we think about it, these are fantastic skills that we need in our leaders in a workplace. Leaders who show some vulnerability, who have gone through challenges themselves, oftentimes are able to spot maybe challenges in other people. They're often more approachable to the colleagues that they manage. And it's a fantastic skill to have when we think about, teamwork and collaboration. And also as well, working with clients in kind of customer service related roles, that ability to be able to put yourself into the shoes of others and to be positive and to have that can-do attitude. Those are all things that are highly valuable in the workplace. So there's a video here, and it's something that I'll send along after this talk, the recording of today, but I'll also send along the slides as well, so that you can look at them in your own time. And there's a video here where it goes into the different experiences that people have had in the workplace. And there's a lot of tips there on how to make the workplace more inclusive.
You have to create a safe.
So these are a range of our helpful supports. So we have our Adult Dyslexia Hub, as I mentioned, and you can go onto that hub, and there's various different sections, one for the workplace, one for education, one for understanding dyslexia. And you can go on, there's little short videos, they're micro short videos. So they're no longer than about 7 minutes, and they're very dyslexia friendly. And you can find out more about disclosure, about, different ways to manage, reading and writing challenges, taking notes and taking minutes. So it's a fantastic resource to signpost colleagues to, or to use yourself if you're dyslexic. And then finally, the AT Hive is a fantastic resource for assistive technology. So if you are dyslexic and you are looking to find particular tools to help you with organization, for example, you can go onto this website and you can choose the organization box. There'll be other boxes for writing, for spelling, you click on the box and then it will bring up the tools that will help with those challenges. So it's just a nice, fast, easy way of getting the information that you need quite quickly. So they are 2 tools that I would highly recommend.